Afghanistan, one person has been killed after a firefight broke out between gunmen, Western security forces, and Afghan guards at Kabul airport. Western troops have been overseeing the evacuation of thousands of Afghans fleeing Taliban rule. The incident comes as Prime Minister Boris Johnson will ask US President Joe Biden to extend the evacuation deadline from Afghanistan when a group of 7 leaders discuss the crisis this week. The Taliban has made it clear that it will not agree to any deadline extension. Arise correspondent Philip CROWTHER is in Islamabad in neighboring Pakistan, where some fleeing Afghans have been flown to before carrying on their journeys to other countries. And he joins us now. Good to see you, Philip. Now, Philip, what's the latest you're hearing about the security situation at Kabul airport following the shooting incident? Has it affected evacuation flights in any way?
No, it has not. And the United States has, in fact, announced that its evacuation flights are still ramping up. The Biden administration pretty proud at this point of how many people it has managed to get out of the country, largely flying to Doha, now also to Bahrain, and other U.S. military flights are going to Ramstein, the U.S. military base in Germany. This incident at the airport doesn't seem to have affected any of those evacuation plans. Now, what it does show us, though, is that there is that volatility, of course, that we already knew about. There have not been any clashes between the US or the British military, who are protecting the airport right now, and the Taliban, who are, of course, outside of the airport perimeter. Now, we have no confirmation as to who might have been involved in this firefight on one side. On the other side, we know it was Afghan security forces that were then joined by members of the German military. In fact, this was news that was brought to us by the German military in a tweet overnight. So it does show that there is that volatility, but probably not something that will influence either the situation within the airport perimeter or outside, because there have been violent incidents before. That does not mean that thousands of people are not queuing up and sometimes, or even causing stampedes, as there have been over the last few days, trying to get into the international airport of Kabul. There are still a lot of people who want to get into that airport and get onto military flights out of Kabul and onto a place like Islamabad, for example, the capital here of Pakistan, about an hour's flight away from Kabul. This is one of the places where people are hoping to get to, and then, as you mentioned, then fly on to other destinations in Europe, for example.
All right, thanks, Philip. Now, we know the US and the UK and other governments are desperately trying to speed up the process of getting these people out, but it's looking increasingly likely that August 31st deadline might not be made. It's just a week away. The Taliban are saying they're not going to be accepting any extensions on that timeline. What do you say about this?
Well, look, that's a serious problem there for the US military and for any of these countries who are staging these evacuation flights right now. And there are so many countries involved in this. The United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, Belgium, the Netherlands, Ukraine. There are so many countries trying to get people out of Kabul right now. All of those military operations would be in trouble by the 31st of August if that deadline is not extended. Because remember, it is the US military that is in control of the airport in Kabul. And the only reason really why this is possible is because the Taliban have allowed them to do this. There is essentially an agreement between the new Taliban leadership in Afghanistan and the United States military for this to even be possible. It is the United States making a deal with the Taliban, with the enemy, to be able to get as many Americans and foreigners, Afghans as well, of course, out of Kabul as possible. Now, if that deal ends on the 31st of August, then that is a bit of a clear deadline there for the United States and other countries to have to get everybody out by then. That sounds pretty much impossible right now, because remember, you might have heard this over the last few days, that a lot of these planes are not leaving at capacity, though they could in theory. There are enough people invited to come onto these planes, they can't necessarily make it through the airport gates because there are so many people outside, so many chaotic scenes, and also there are many Taliban checkpoints after all. I have spoken to quite a few families who are trying to get through. I'm getting updated information from them, and for days now they have not managed to get through the mess, the chaotic scenes that they are encountering on the outside of the airport, despite the fact that they have a seat or several seats guaranteed in evacuation flights. So it's not easy to get out, even if you have the authorization, even if you have the right documents. These are the kinds of situations that are creating these chaotic scenes that you have been seeing now for a whole week outside of the international airport in Kabul.
Wow, so you're saying that there are bottlenecks that are trumping the US efforts to get them out on time. But let's look at other options. You're in Pakistan, the main political and financial supporters of the Taliban. What leverage can the Pakistan government bring to bear to ensure everyone seeking refuge gets out safely? And will Pakistan open its doors in welcome as they have in the past? Briefly, Philip.
To give you the short answer, no, Pakistan is not opening its doors to evacuees at this point. Let me explain what is happening in two different points of Pakistan. First of all, the border with Afghanistan is not open to refugees. There is traffic across the border from those who've been allowed to do it anyway, from Pakistan into Afghanistan, from Afghanistan into Pakistan. And there is also trade happening between the countries over the border that's around 3.5 hours drive away from here. So no refugees coming in over the land border, as you mentioned, as has been the case in the past during the first Afghan war, but also at the start of the war between the United States and the Taliban, of course, a whole 20 years ago now. Also, here in Islamabad, there's a reason why we're here, of course, because this is one of the cities where these air bridges are happening. There are Belgian, Dutch and Luxembourgish flights that are leaving Kabul every day and landing here in Islamabad. And those who are lucky enough to be on those planes, well, then they have to wait here to get on another one that gets them to Europe. Again, the same problem, though. Let me give you just one example before we end. There was one Belgian evacuation flight that came back from Kabul with absolutely nobody on board. That was a few days ago. That can happen. They have to leave all of a sudden.
And we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for giving us your insights on the developments there.